My name is Suzanne, 33 years old, and until last Sunday, I thought I knew what family meant. As a successful real estate agent in Boston, I never expected to hear those words at our weekly dinner. You have 2 days to get your stuff out. That house belongs to your brother now. 8 years of living there, $80,000 in renovations, countless memories all erased with one sentence. I sat silent while my brother Jason smirked, but they had no idea what I was planning. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from today? Hit subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family injustice, and leave a comment if you think blood ties sometimes need to come with receipts. Growing up in the suburbs of Boston, our family name was synonymous with property development. My father Richard started with nothing but built an empire of commercial real estate across New England. He loved telling the story of his first property flip at 22 years old, turning a rundown duplex into a profitable rental that funded his next 3 purchases. My mother Margaret managed all the financial aspects, keeping impeccable records and negotiating with banks to secure the best terms. They were a powerhouse business couple respected throughout the industry. Then there was Jason, my brother, 3 years older, and forever the golden child. Despite mediocre grades and a business sense that consisted mainly of taking credit for others' ideas, he was groomed from childhood to take over the family business. When he barely passed his business classes at college, Dad hired tutors. When he crashed the company car, Mom replaced it without question. When he lost a major client due to his carelessness, Dad covered for him, telling everyone it was a strategic decision. I was different. From early on, I was fascinated by architecture and design, constantly sketching floor plans and reading about property values. I worked summers at Dad's office, not for show, but actually learning the business from the ground up. I graduated with honors in business and real estate, earned my license at 22, and closed my first commercial deal 6 months later. My commissions quickly outpaced Jason's salary, something that was never acknowledged at family gatherings. The house in question was supposedly a gift. On my 25th birthday, my parents presented me with keys wrapped in a blue velvet box. "This is yours forever," Suzanne. Dad had set his hand on my shoulder. "You've earned it." It was a beautiful Victorian in Newton, needing work, but with incredible potential. The gesture had seemed so genuine that tears welled in my eyes. "We wanted you to have something that appreciates in value," Mom had added. "Something solid." Over the next 8 years, I poured my heart and savings into that house. I restored the original hardwood floors, uncovering maple planks under 3 layers of linoleum. I updated the kitchen with professional-grade appliances, replacing outdated cabinets with custom cherry wood. The bathroom renovations alone cost $20,000, bringing modern luxury while preserving vintage tiles I sourced from a specialist in Vermont. I added a sunroom that became my sanctuary, with windows specially designed to maximize natural light. Every wall was repainted, every fixture updated, every corner reimagined. In total, I spent over $80,000, not counting the countless weekends of my own labor. The property value had nearly doubled, something my father, ever the developer, had nodded at with what I thought was paternal pride during his visits. "Smart improvements," he'd say, examining my kitchen backsplash, or the custom shelving in the living room. "You've got the touch." Family tensions began escalating 6 months ago when I landed the Riverside Plaza deal, a $30 million commercial property that Jason had been pursuing for our family business. The client specifically requested to work with me, citing my attention to detail and innovative approaches to urban development. Dad had been quiet when I announced it at Sunday dinner, while Mom had given me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jason had stabbed at his roast beef, muttering something about poaching family contacts. What I didn't know then was that Jason's financial situation had spiraled out of control. His gambling addiction, carefully hidden from our parents, had accumulated debts exceeding $250,000. He had borrowed from loan sharks, maxed out credit cards in the company name, and was facing threats that were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Rather than admit his problem, he had convinced our parents that his financial troubles were temporary setbacks from aggressive business expansion. Our Sunday dinners had been a tradition for 5 years, ever since Mom survived her breast cancer scare. "Life is too short not to see family weekly," she had declared during her recovery. These dinners followed a predictable pattern. Dad dominated conversation with business talk. Mom served elaborate meals, Jason boasted about deals he hadn't actually closed, and I shared genuine successes that were systematically. Minimized. The subtle changes in these gatherings over recent weeks should have warned me. Dad stopped asking about my projects. Mom inquired less about when I might meet someone and settle down. Jason began arriving with an unusual punctuality and a newfound interest in property law. Looking back, the signs were there like termites weakening foundations before a collapse. 2 Sundays before the announcement, Dad had casually asked about my renovation receipts. For insurance purposes, he'd claimed, making sure you're properly covered. I had foolishly shared my meticulous documentation, proud of my investment, and believing he was finally taking interest in my accomplishments. How wrong I had been. That Sunday started like any other. I arrived at my parents' sprawling colonial home in Wellesley at exactly 5:30, bottle of Pinot Noir in hand, dressed in a navy blue dress that I knew my mother would approve of. The driveway already contained more cars than usual, including my Uncle Frank's Mercedes and my cousin Tara's SUV. Extended family wasn't typical for our weekly dinners, which immediately triggered my professional instincts. In real estate, unexpected participants at a closing usually meant complications. The front door opened before I could ring the bell, my mother standing there in her pearl necklace and cream cashmere sweater. Her smile seemed plastered on her eyes, darting away from mine as she accepted my customary kiss on the cheek. "Everyone's in the living room," she said, her voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "Your father opened the good scotch." The living room fell silent as I entered. Dad stood by the fireplace, tumbler in hand, while Uncle Frank and Aunt Patricia sat stiffly on the sofa. Cousin Tara offered a weak smile from her armchair. The only person missing was Jason. "Traffic must be light today," Dad said instead of his usual greeting. "You're 7 minutes early." I settled into my usual spot, accepting a glass of wine from my mother, who seemed to be moving with mechanical precision between guests. The conversation was painfully artificial, dwelling on weather patterns and local road construction. Uncle Frank, normally boisterous about politics, maintained an uncharacteristic focus on his drink. Aunt Patricia asked 3 times about my little house, though she had visited just last month. At 6:15, a full 15 minutes after our standard dining time, the front door swung open and Jason strode in. His entrance had always commanded attention, but today he moved with additional swagger, stopping to straighten his tie in the hallway mirror before joining us. "Sorry I'm late," he announced without sounding sorry at all. "Had to finalize some paperwork." His eyes met mine briefly, a flash of triumph passing over his features. Mom immediately rose. "Well, we can eat now. Everything's ready." The dining room table was set with the heirloom china usually reserved for major holidays. A crown roast of lamb, my favorite, steamed at the center, surrounded by roasted potatoes, asparagus, with hollandaise and fresh bread from the artisanal bakery downtown. Mom had prepared all my favorite foods, another warning sign I should have heeded. "Quite a spread, Mom," I said, attempting normalcy. "Special occasion." "Just felt like putting in some extra effort," she replied, busying herself with the serving spoons. Dad took his place at the head of the table, waiting until everyone was seated before raising his glass. To family, he said, his standard toast suddenly weighted with unspoken meaning. The meal progressed with stilted conversation about safe topics. Aunt Patricia detailed her garden plans for spring. Uncle Frank discussed a new golf club he had purchased. Tara mentioned her daughter's dance recital. No one asked about my work, though. I had closed a record-breaking deal just days before. Jason, seated directly across from me, kept checking his watch and exchanging glances with Dad. As dessert was served, a chocolate mousse that went largely untouched, my father cleared his throat and set his napkin aside with deliberate care. The room fell silent. "Suzanne," he began, his businessman voice activated, "we need to discuss your living situation." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "My living situation?" "The house in Newton," he continued, looking at a point just over my shoulder rather than meeting my eyes. "There's been a change of plans." Jason leaned forward slightly, unable to fully suppress his smirk. "What kind of change?" I asked, though a sickening realization was already forming. Dad straightened in his chair. "The property needs to be transferred to Jason. He's facing some financial challenges with the Westfield project, and the equity in that house would stabilize his position." My mouth went dry. "But it's my house. You gave it to me 8 years ago." "Actually," my father said, producing a folder from beside his chair, "the house has always remained in our name. There was never a formal transfer of ownership. The room spun slightly as I processed his words. 8 years, $80,000 in renovations, countless hours of work, all on a property that legally had never been mine. This is a family decision, Dad continued, as if discussing a minor change in vacation plans. Jason needs this support, and you're doing well enough to find another place. My mother stared intently at her untouched dessert. Uncle Frank suddenly found his watch fascinating. Aunt Patricia examined her manicure. You have 2 days to get your stuff out, my father announced, his tone final. Jason needs to take possession immediately to secure financing against the property. 2 days, I repeated, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. That should be sufficient, my father replied. You don't have to take everything at once, just the essentials. Jason will allow you reasonable access to collect remaining items later. How generous of him, I said, surprised at how steady my voice remained despite the earthquake happening inside me. Jason's face adopted a mask of fake sympathy that did nothing to hide the triumph in his eyes. I know this is sudden, Susie, but I'm in a tough spot, and family helps family. The childhood nickname he knew I hated was a deliberate twist of the knife. Everyone at the table seemed to be waiting for my reaction, perhaps expecting tears or shouting. Jason was practically vibrating with anticipation of my breakdown, clearly hoping I would make a scene that would only reinforce their narrative of me as emotional and unreasonable compared to his calculated pragmatism. Instead, I carefully placed my napkin beside my plate, took a measured sip of water, and looked my father directly in the eyes. I understand, I said simply. The lack of argument seemed to unsettle him more than any protest would have. We can discuss compensation for your improvements at some point. He added, a slight defensive note creeping into his voice. That won't be necessary, I replied, rising from my chair with deliberate calm. If you'll excuse me, I should get started packing. As I walked toward the door, I could feel their confusion radiating behind me. This wasn't the script they had prepared for. They had expected pleading, perhaps accusations of favoritism, maybe tears. My dignity was the one response they hadn't anticipated. Suzanne, my mother called, finally finding her voice. Don't you want dessert? I turned at the doorway, taking in the tableau of my family. Frozen in their places, faces displaying varying degrees of discomfort, expectation, and in Jason's case, disappointment at being robbed of the drama he had anticipated. No thank you, I said clearly. I've had my fill. With that, I walked out, closing the door behind me with a soft click that somehow felt more final than any slam could have. The 15-minute drive home passed in a blur. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white while tears streamed down my face, blurring the familiar route. 8 years of memories flashed through my mind with each passing streetlight. The weekend I spent stripping wallpaper until my fingers blistered. The housewarming party where my college friends had christened the renovated kitchen. The garden I had planted with perennials that would bloom for someone else this spring. But beneath the heartbreak, something else was building. A slow, burning determination sparked in my chest, growing stronger with each mile between me and my parents' house. This wasn't the first time Jason had been favored at my expense, just the most dramatic instance of a lifetime pattern. There was the time my high school graduation party was scaled back because Jason needed money for his business venture, a car detailing service that lasted exactly 3 months before he abandoned it. There was my college graduation where Dad spent the entire celebration talking to Jason's friends about investment opportunities rather than acknowledging my summa cum laude honors. There were countless Christmas mornings where Jason's pile of gifts towered over mine. Not that material things mattered, but the symbolism was impossible to ignore. As I pulled into the driveway of the house that was apparently never really mine, I made a decision. This would be the last time the Hamilton family dynamics would unfold according to their established script. This time I would write the ending. I called Amber, my best friend since college, who now worked as a family law attorney. Despite the late hour, she answered on the second ring. They did what she exclaimed after I explained the situation. That's beyond cold, Suzanne. Is it legal? I asked, pacing through my kitchen, the granite countertops I had selected with such care now seeming like monuments to my naivety. It depends, she said, her voice shifting into professional mode. Who's on the deed? Do you have documentation of their gift intent? What about proof of the improvements you made? Those questions sparked my first strategic actions. Still in my dinner dress, I pulled out my laptop and accessed the county property records. Sure enough, Richard and Margaret Hamilton remained the sole owners of record, despite 8 years of me paying the property taxes, insurance, and making all improvements. Not once had they transferred ownership as promised, nor had they added my name to any documentation. Next, I dug through my files, locating every receipt for materials, every contract with plumbers and electricians, every permit application for structural work. I had documented everything meticulously, partly from professional habit and partly from pride in transforming the property. Photos chronicled the before and after of each project, evidence of my investment beyond just money. At midnight, while sorting through old birthday cards, I found it. The card they had given me, along with the keys written in my mother's flowing handwriting. "This house is our gift to you, Suzanne. May it be the foundation for your dreams and a testament to how proud we are of you. All our love, Mom and Dad." The date was clearly visible in the corner. I photographed the card, adding it to my growing file of evidence. Sleep was impossible. At 2 a.m, I called Lauren, my mentor from when I first entered real estate, and now a powerhouse broker with her own firm. She had also become a surrogate mother figure after seeing my potential early on, often providing the guidance and support my actual mother seemed incapable of offering. "You need to think 3 steps ahead," Lauren advised after hearing my situation. "This isn't just about the house anymore. This is about setting boundaries and standing up for yourself." "I want what's fair," I told her, "but I also want them to understand what they've done." "Then we need a strategy," she said firmly. "Not revenge, but justice and consequences. By morning, I want you to have 3 clear actions ready to execute." After hanging up, I continued my investigation. A call to my friend Thomas at Boston First National, where my family had banked for generations, revealed what I had begun to suspect. Jason's financial challenges weren't business-related at all. He had accumulated gambling debts, exceeding $250,000 with loan sharks, now threatening more than his credit score. He's been trying to get loans using different properties as collateral. Thomas confided, clearly uncomfortable sharing this information, but more uncomfortable with the family's treatment of me. The bank turned him down because of his credit history, but if he had clear title to a property with substantial equity, like my house, I finished his thought. Exactly. With that much equity, he could secure funds quickly. The pieces fell into place. My parents weren't just playing favorites this time. They were enabling Jason's addiction while using my investment to bail him out. The betrayal cut even deeper. Before dawn broke, I had my 3-part strategy clear in my mind. It would require precision timing, irrefutable evidence, and most challenging for me, perfect emotional control. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows of the house that had never legally been mine, I made coffee in the kitchen I had designed and began making calls. This would be a very different kind of property transaction than my family anticipated. I called my office first thing, something I had never done before. "Family emergency," I told my assistant Rachel. "I need today and tomorrow cleared completely." She knew me well enough not to ask questions, immediately rescheduling my 3 client meetings and promising to handle anything urgent. My first in-person meeting was with Daniel Ramirez, a real estate attorney who specialized in property disputes and unjust enrichment claims. I arrived at his downtown office at 8:30 sharp, carrying a folder containing everything I had gathered overnight. "This is textbook unjust enrichment," Daniel said after reviewing my documents. "They made an explicit promise. You relied on that promise to your detriment by investing substantial funds, and now they're attempting to reclaim the improved asset without compensation." "What's my best move?" I asked, watching as he examined the birthday card with my parents' written promise. "2 parallel tracks," he advised, leaning back in his chair. "We prepare a formal legal claim for all improvements plus emotional damages. Simultaneously, we use the threat of that claim as leverage for negotiation. How quickly can we move?" "I can have demand letters ready by this afternoon." "But Suzanne," he added, studying my face, "are you sure you want to go this route with family?" "They stopped acting like family the moment they treated my home as a bargaining chip for my brother's gambling debts," I replied with certainty. From Daniel's office, I drove directly to the house, now viewing it through the lens of documentation rather than home. For 3 hours, I methodically photographed every improvement I had made, from the crown molding in the dining room to the custom closet systems in the bedrooms. Each photo was time-stamped and added to a digital folder organized by room and project date. Next came the contractors. I called every professional who had worked on the house over the years. Mario the plumber who had installed the heated bathroom floors. Eliza the carpenter who had crafted the built-in library shelving. Sam the electrician who had rewired the entire house to support modern technology while preserving the vintage fixtures. Each one agreed to provide a statement regarding the work completed and its value contribution to the property. By early afternoon, I moved to phase 2 of my plan. My parents had always underestimated my industry connections, viewing my real estate career as somehow less significant than the family business. Those connections now proved invaluable. A discreet call to Harriet Wilson, who served on the board of Boston Commercial Developers Association with my father, revealed what I had begun to suspect. Hamilton Properties was facing significant financial pressures beyond Jason's personal issues. 3 major deals had fallen through in recent months, and investors were asking uncomfortable questions about capital reserves. "Your father has been leveraging existing properties to maintain appearances," Harriet confided, "but the company isn't the powerhouse it used to be. Between us, there's talk of a potential bankruptcy reorganization if things don't turn around quickly." This information added another dimension to their desperate grab for my house. It wasn't just about saving Jason. It was about keeping the family business afloat through increasingly questionable means. My next call was to Mark Stevens, a private investigator I had worked with on due diligence for commercial properties. I explained the situation and my suspicions about Jason's involvement in the company's troubles. "I can pull financial records and track movement patterns," Mark assured me. "If he's skimming from the business to cover gambling debts, there will be a trail." By late afternoon, Mark had already delivered his first report. Jason had indeed been siphoning funds from Hamilton Properties, creating false vendor accounts that paid directly to his personal offshore account. The amounts totaled over $300,000 in the past year alone, coinciding with frequent trips to Atlantic City and private poker games in Back Bay. With this explosive information in hand, I faced a moral dilemma. Exposing Jason's theft would likely destroy not just his relationship with our parents, but potentially the company itself, affecting employees who had nothing to do with our family drama. Yet, allowing the deception to continue meant enabling both his addiction and my parents' toxic dynamics. After careful consideration, I decided the truth was necessary, but how and when to deploy it would be critical. As evening approached, I focused on practical matters. I rented a small storage unit for items I couldn't immediately relocate. I accepted Amber's offer of her guest house for temporary accommodation. I began packing the irreplaceable items, first my grandmother's china photo albums, the quilt my mother had made before family business took precedence over such personal gestures. Each object carried memories, making the process emotionally exhausting. The crystal vase from my college graduation. The first piece of art I had purchased with my commission check. Books with marginalia tracking my thoughts over years. These weren't just possessions, but markers of a life I had built now being dismantled by parental betrayal. By nightfall, I had completed the final component of day 1 preparations. With assistance from Lauren's legal team, I had drafted a formal demand letter for compensation for all improvements backed by the extensive documentation I had gathered. The amount calculated conservatively exceeded $120,000 when accounting for increased property value resulting from my renovations. As I prepared for bed in what would soon no longer be my bedroom, my phone chimed with a text from my father. "Your mother is concerned about you. Will you be out by tomorrow evening as discussed?" The casual tone, as if we were coordinating a normal move rather than an eviction from what was supposed to be my own home, cemented my resolve. I responded simply, "I'll be ready at exactly 6 p.m. tomorrow. Please ensure everyone is present." Then I turned off my phone and slept surprisingly well, the clarity of purpose serving as a better sedative than any uncertainty ever could. The morning of my final day began with methodical efficiency. I had arranged for a moving company to arrive at 9 professional movers who specialized in quick relocations. They focused on furniture and larger items, loading my carefully selected pieces into their truck while leaving behind anything that had come with the house originally. While they worked, I met with Caroline Fletcher, a certified property appraiser recommended by Lauren. She walked through each room, taking notes and photographs, paying particular attention to the improvements. Based on comparable properties in this neighborhood, Caroline explained as we concluded the tour. Your renovations have increased the value by approximately 70% above market appreciation. The craftsmanship in the kitchen alone adds significant value, and the bathroom renovations are magazine-worthy. Her official report would be completed within hours, providing additional documentation for my claim. The timing was deliberate, allowing me to present fresh professional valuation at the evening's confrontation. By noon, the movers had finished with the items bound for storage and Amber's guest house. I thanked them with generous tips, then turned my attention to the strategic staging of what remained. Rather than leaving the house empty as my family likely expected, I carefully arranged the living room for what would essentially be a business meeting. The dining table was cleared of personal items, but set with folders labeled for each family member containing identical copies of all evidence and claims. My father's business partners had been more challenging to arrange. After my revelations about the company's financial situation and Jason's embezzlement, Harriet had connected me with William Parker and George Thompson, two major investors in Hamilton properties, who were increasingly concerned about their capital. Once I shared Mark's investigative findings, they agreed to drop by during my family's arrival, creating a perfect storm of accountability. We've been trying to get a straight answer from Richard for months, William had said during our call. If what you're showing us is accurate, we need to take immediate action to protect our investments. At 2 in the afternoon, as I was reviewing my presentation materials one final time, there was an unexpected knock at the door. Jason stood on the porch wearing a casual smirk and designer sunglasses. Thought I'd check how the packing's going, he announced, pushing past me into the foyer. Dad was worried you might be difficult about the timeline. I maintained perfect composure, observing him with the detached interest of someone studying an unfamiliar species. Everything's proceeding as scheduled, I replied evenly. He wandered through the living room, eyeing the staged setting with confusion. What's all this? Having a going-away party for yourself? Just preparing for this evening's meeting, I said. I assume you'll be present with Mom and Dad at 6. He snorted dismissively. Yeah, we'll be here to collect the keys. Though I might be a little late. I have an important call with some investors that could run long. I strongly suggest you prioritize being on time today, Jason. My tone made him glance up sharply. There will be matters discussed that directly impact your future. Something in my calmness seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He shifted his weight, attempting to regain his superior position. Listen, Susie, I know you're upset about the house, but business is business. When you understand the bigger picture. I understand the picture perfectly, I interrupted smoothly. Including your trips to Atlantic City every second Tuesday, the offshore account in the Caymans, and the $300,000 missing from the company accounts. His face drained of color so rapidly, I momentarily worried he might faint on my freshly polished hardwood floors. You don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but his eyes darted nervously around the room as if searching for recording devices. 6 p.m. Jason, don't be late. I opened the front door meaningfully. He stumbled toward the exit, his earlier swagger entirely evaporated. At the threshold, he turned back desperation, replacing arrogance. Suzanne, wait. We should talk privately before everyone arrives. There are things you don't understand. 6 p.m., I repeated firmly, closing the door on his protests. The remainder of the afternoon was devoted to final preparations. I changed into a charcoal gray business suit, the same one I wore for high-stakes property negotiations. I organized my presentation materials, ensuring every claim was backed by multiple forms of evidence. I set up a small camera system borrowed from Mark, not to record the conversation legally, but to document any potential property damage during this transitional period. At 5:30, I stood in the center of my kitchen one last time, running my hands along the countertops I had selected with such care. Despite the betrayal and anger, a wave of sadness washed over me. This house had been my sanctuary, my achievement, my statement of independence. Leaving it felt like abandoning a part of myself. But as I looked around, I realized the true value wasn't in the physical structure, but in what it had taught me about self-reliance, about documentation, about standing up for myself even against those who should have protected my interests. These lessons would remain mine long after the keys were surrendered. At 5:55, I took my position at the head of the dining table, documents arranged before me, and waited for my family to arrive for a reckoning, none of them anticipated. The doorbell rang at precisely 6 p.m. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see 3 figures on the porch, exactly as I had requested. I took one deep breath, straightened my suit jacket, and opened the door with a professional smile. Right on time, I greeted them. "Please come in." My parents entered first, their expressions a mixture of impatience and discomfort. Mom clutched her purse tightly against her cream blouse, while Dad surveyed the house with the calculating gaze of a developer already planning changes. Jason followed behind them, noticeably subdued. After our earlier encounter, his earlier swagger replaced with nervous finger tapping against his thigh. "We assumed you'd be ready to go," my father said, frowning at the formal table setting visible through the foyer. "What's all this?" "A necessary discussion before the property changes hands," I replied calmly. "Please take a seat in the dining room. Everything is prepared." Mom hesitated, looking around at the partially packed house. "Suzanne, if you need more time to move your things." "This isn't about time, Mom. It's about accountability. Please sit down." Something in my tone must have conveyed the futility of resistance. They filed into the dining room, taking seats at the table where each position was marked with a name card and folder. I remained standing, assuming the position I'd seen my father take during countless business presentations. "Before we proceed with the transfer of this property," I began, my voice steady and professional, "we need to address several legal and financial matters." Dad's eyebrows shot up. "Legal matters, Suzanne? This is a family decision about a family property. There's nothing to discuss legally." "Actually, there is." I opened my presentation folder. "Let's start with the matter of unjust enrichment." For the next 20 minutes, I methodically presented my case. The written promise that the house was a gift, the 8 years of property taxes and insurance payments I had made, the extensive documentation of every improvement and its impact on property value, the official appraisal showing the 70% value increase resulting directly from my investments. The total value added through my improvements comes to $127,000, I concluded, sliding the appraiser's report across the table. "This represents funds I invested based on the representation that this property was mine, as stated in writing in this birthday card." I placed the photocopy of the card beside the report. My father's face had progressively reddened during my presentation. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "You lived here rent-free for 8 years. Those improvements were your choice." "Choices made under the written promise that this was my home," I countered smoothly. "My attorney has prepared this demand letter for compensation." I distributed copies of Daniel's meticulously drafted document. "You'll note that we're prepared to file formally on Monday if a resolution isn't reached today." My mother looked genuinely shocked while Jason shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting between the documents and the door. "Now, let's move to the second matter," I continued, without giving them time to regroup. "The actual reason for this sudden property transfer." Jason's head snapped up, panic flashing across his face. "Suzanne, don't." I ignored him, turning to my parents. "Did you know that the financial challenges Jason mentioned aren't related to any legitimate business venture? That he's accumulated gambling debts exceeding $300,000? That loan sharks have been threatening him for payment?" My mother gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "That's not possible. Jason told us the Westfield project had cost overruns that." "There is no Westfield project," I interrupted gently. "There never was. The money is going to cover gambling losses and to pay off threats against him." Before my father could respond, the doorbell rang again. Perfect timing. "Excuse me for one moment," I said, walking calmly to answer it, while my family sat in stunned silence. William Parker and George Thompson stood on the porch, along with Harriet Wilson. All 3 were major investors in Hamilton Properties and members of the company board. Right on time, I greeted them. "We're just discussing some financial discrepancies that might interest you." My father's face went from red to ashen as his business partners entered the dining room. "William, George, what are you doing here?" "Suzanne contacted us with some concerning information." William replied, his tone grave. "Information that, if accurate, requires immediate attention from the board." I resumed my position at the head of the table. "This brings us to the third matter. The funds Jason has been embezzling from Hamilton Properties. The room erupted in chaos. Jason leapt to his feet, knocking his chair backward. She's lying. She's just bitter about the house. I have bank records, Jason, I replied evenly, sliding copies toward the business partners. Transfers from company accounts to shell corporations you control, which then funnel directly to your personal offshore account in the Caymans. Dates and amounts matching exactly with your gambling junkets to Atlantic City. William examined the documents with growing alarm. Richard, these match the discrepancies our accountants have been trying to trace for months. My father seemed to age years in minutes, his shoulders slumping as he stared at his son. Jason, tell me this isn't true. Instead of answering, Jason lunged for the documents, but George Thompson smoothly gathered them before he could grab them. There's more, I continued, maintaining my professional demeanor, despite the emotional maelstrom swirling around the table. I have documentation of Jason's admission regarding these activities. I pressed play on my phone, and Jason's voice filled the room from our conversation earlier that day. You don't understand. I had to cover the losses somehow. Dad would have killed me if he knew I lost that much at the tables. The company has insurance. It's not like anyone really gets hurt. My mother began to sob quietly, while my father sat perfectly still, his world visibly collapsing around him. So, here's where we stand. I summarized reclaiming control of the meeting. I have legal claims for unjust enrichment regarding this property. Jason has committed embezzlement that could result in criminal charges. And Hamilton Properties is facing potential bankruptcy due to mismanagement and fraud. I closed my folder and looked at each person at the table. I'm prepared to surrender the keys to this house as requested. But first, I require a cashier's check for the full value of my improvements, as detailed in the appraisal report. Additionally, I want written acknowledgement of the deception regarding ownership and a formal apology. The room fell silent as my family and their business associates absorbed the magnitude of what had transpired. Finally, my father spoke, his voice lacking its usual authority. You've certainly done your homework, Suzanne. He glanced at his business partners, then back to me. What happens with these documents if we meet your terms? The unjust enrichment claim disappears once I'm fairly compensated, I replied. As for Jason's activities, that's between you, your son, and your business partners. My concern was ensuring you had all the facts before making decisions about family assets. William cleared his throat. Richard, we need to convene an emergency board meeting regardless. These allegations are too serious to ignore. My mother finally found her voice, though it trembled with emotion. How could you do this to us, Suzanne? We're your family. I looked at her directly, allowing a hint of my hurt to show through my professional facade. That's precisely why this shouldn't have happened, Mom. Family doesn't take advantage of family. You taught me that, remember? For the first time, I saw genuine regret in her eyes. My father pulled out his checkbook, a gesture that seemed both a surrender and acknowledgement. I'll need to transfer funds for the full amount, he said quietly. It will take until morning. That's acceptable, I replied. I'll have my attorney prepare a settlement agreement tonight. As the business implications of the situation became clear, my parents' focus shifted dramatically from me to Jason and the company's future. William and George moved to the living room with my father to discuss immediate steps to protect the business, while my mother alternated between tearful recriminations toward Jason and stunned silence. In the midst of this reconfiguration of family dynamics, I placed the house keys on the table. I've documented the property's condition. As of today, I informed them. The settlement will include provisions regarding any damage discovered after my departure. Jason, now cornered by evidence he couldn't deny, attempted one final manipulation. Susie, he pleaded, using the childhood nickname again, but this time with desperation rather than condescension. You don't have to do this. We can work something out between us, keep the business stuff private. I regarded him calmly. This isn't about punishment, Jason. It's about consequences and truth, something our family has avoided for too long. As my parents and their business associates continued their urgent discussion about the company's future, I gathered my personal items and prepared to leave. The confrontation had unfolded even more definitively than I had anticipated, shifting family power dynamics that had been calcified for decades. Before departing, I paused in the doorway of what had been my home, looking back at the family tableau now irrevocably altered by truth and accountability. The house keys remained on the table, but I carried something far more valuable with me: my dignity and the knowledge that I had finally stood up for myself in a family that had never taught me how. 2 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new condominium overlooking the Charles River. The morning sun glinted off the water, casting golden reflections across my spacious living room through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 40% more square footage than my previous house with modern amenities and a doorman, it represented not just a change in address, but a transformation in how I valued myself. The legal proceedings had concluded more swiftly than anticipated. My father, facing scrutiny from investors and the board, had settled my claim for the full $127,000, plus an additional $30,000 for emotional distress. The funds had provided the down payment for this property, which I had purchased with a proper deed in my name alone. Jason's situation had unfolded dramatically in the weeks following our confrontation. An independent audit confirmed his embezzlement exceeded $400,000 over 3 years, forcing the board to take action. Rather than press criminal charges that could have resulted in jail time, they had removed him from all company positions and structured a repayment plan that included mandatory addiction counseling. The most significant changes, however, were in the family dynamics. For the first month, communication had been limited to terse emails regarding the settlement details. Then gradually my mother began reaching out with hesitant text messages asking about my new place and how I was doing. Our first meeting had been awkward at a neutral coffee shop halfway between her home and mine. She had aged visibly, stress etching new lines around her eyes. "I never thought about how we always favored Jason," she admitted, after several minutes of small talk. "It was so automatic, so ingrained in how we functioned as a family. Your father always said boys need more support in business, that you were naturally more capable and would be fine." She stirred her untouched coffee. "We were wrong, Suzanne. I was wrong." It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was an acknowledgement I had never expected to hear. Over subsequent meetings, she revealed more about how she had enabled both my father's and Jason's behavior over decades, sublimating her own opinions to maintain family harmony. "I thought I was being a good wife and mother," she explained during our third lunch. "But I was really just avoiding conflict, even when standing up would have been the right thing to do." My relationship with my father developed more slowly. His first communication was a formal business letter acknowledging the misunderstanding regarding the house ownership, careful wording that stopped short of admitting deliberate deception, but represented the closest he could come to an apology. The company itself had undergone significant restructuring. With William and George taking more active roles on the board, Hamilton Properties had managed to avoid bankruptcy, but emerged as a much more tightly regulated organization. My father remained as chairman, but with reduced authority and mandatory oversight of major decisions. The most surprising development came 6 weeks after the confrontation, when my father called to ask my opinion on a potential acquisition in the Back Bay area. "The numbers look solid," he said, his voice still carrying the stiffness that characterized our new relationship, but I wondered about the zoning restrictions on the eastern parcel. It was a small gesture, but it represented something profound professional respect he had never before extended to me. I provided my honest assessment, pointing out concerns about pending city council decisions that might affect development rights. He listened without interruption, then thanked me for my insight. "You've always had good instincts for this business," he added, before hanging up the closest thing to a compliment he had offered in years. My professional life had flourished in parallel with these personal evolutions. Lauren had offered me a partnership at her firm, recognizing the business acumen and determination I had demonstrated. I accepted, bringing several major clients with me and establishing a specialization in property development ethics, an irony not lost on my father when he heard the news. Beyond my immediate family, I had discovered unexpected support networks. Harriet Wilson had become something of a mentor, inviting me to industry events and introducing me to key players who had previously known me only as Richard Hamilton's daughter. "You've earned your place at the table," she told me during a charity gala where I was the youngest person on the organizing committee. "Not through your name, but through your actions." One rainy Tuesday evening, almost exactly 1 year after the fateful dinner, my mother called to invite me to Sunday dinner. "Just the 4 of us," she said, a nervous edge to her voice. "Your father and Jason would like to see you." I hesitated, memories of past family dynamics flashing through my mind. "It's your decision," she added quickly. We would understand if you're not ready. That acknowledgement of my boundaries, so different from the emotional manipulation of the past, helped me make my decision. The dinner was nothing like the weekly gatherings of before. We met at a restaurant rather than the family home neutral territory that prevented anyone from assuming control through environment. Jason arrived punctually sober and subdued his designer clothes replaced with simpler attire. 8 months clean, he told me when we had a moment alone by the restaurant's fireplace. It's been the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most necessary. He twisted his water glass, avoiding my eyes. I'm sorry, Suzanne. For the house, for everything. I can't change what happened, but I'm trying to be better. My father's approach was less direct, but equally meaningful. Throughout dinner, he deliberately asked about my projects, listening attentively to my responses. When business talk emerged, he included me equally in the conversation, even deferring to my expertise regarding a zoning issue affecting a property in Cambridge. As dessert was served, he cleared his throat in a gesture reminiscent of that fateful night. But this time, his expression held uncertainty rather than authority. The board has been discussing new leadership development, he said, focusing intently on his coffee cup. William suggested we consider bringing in fresh perspectives from outside the current executive team. He finally looked up, meeting my eyes directly. Your name came up, Suzanne. Not from me, though. I didn't object. They were impressed with how you handled the situation last year. With your attention to detail and ethical standards, the offer hung in the air between us, carrying layers of meaning beyond the professional opportunity. I took my time before responding. I appreciate the consideration, I said carefully. I'm committed to my partnership with Lauren currently, but I'd be open to discussing a board position that wouldn't conflict with those responsibilities. It wasn't complete forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was a bridge neither of us had expected to exist again. As we parted that evening, my mother hugged me tightly. You taught us all something important, she whispered. About standing up for yourself, about consequences. I wish we hadn't made the lesson necessary, but I'm proud of how you handled it. Standing now on my balcony 1 year later, watching boats navigate the river below, I reflected on the journey from that dining room confrontation to today. The house in Newton had long since been sold, my parents downsizing to a luxury condo as part of their financial reorganization. Jason was working for a nonprofit that helped gambling addiction recovery, finding purpose in helping others avoid his mistakes. And I had discovered something vital about myself, that self-worth doesn't come from family validation or property ownership, but from the courage to demand fair treatment and the wisdom to create boundaries that protect your well-being. My phone chimed with a text from Amber, board meeting prep at 11. Bringing coffee and those scones you like. I smiled, typing a quick confirmation. My circle had shifted, expanded in some ways and contracted in others, now filled with people who valued me for who I was, rather than how I fit into their expectations. The family story wasn't over. These relationships would continue to evolve, require maintenance, face new challenges. But the script had been fundamentally rewritten. No longer was I the accommodating daughter accepting less than I deserved. I had claimed my place, my voice, and my value. Not through drama or revenge, but through truth, documentation, and the quiet power of standing firm. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who took advantage of your generosity? I hope my story gave you the courage to speak your truth and set healthy boundaries. Remember that family should lift you up, not tear you down. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in my situation. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the family you choose is more supportive than the one you're born into.